Journalists from different media houses, both print and broadcast, covering the hardship protest was attacked by the rampaging hoodlums in Kano State. The attackers who were carrying sticks and machetes along Sokoto Road were said to have smashed the glasses of the vehicle, and those inside were showered with glass particles, including our correspondent Ibrahim Issa, who sustained some injury. The police in Kano State said a section of the Digital Industrial Park of the Nigerian Communication Commission, NCC, in Kano State was attacked by protesters on Thursday. The Commissioner of Police, Salma Dogo, confirmed that the generator house was set ablaze and the office was vandalized. In the face of the unrest arising from the #EndBad governance protest in Kano State, Governor Abba Yusuf has declared a 24-hour curfew in the state with immediate effect. I mean, it is worrisome that if day one happened this way, what happens on day two? What happens on day three and the remaining days? And do you think, many are wondering if this protest will last that long. Meanwhile, in all of these, security agencies say they are on top of their game and will continue to approach protesters professionally. So tonight, let's speak with Dr. Sule Yao Sule. He's a Kano-based journalist and also an academic. He joins me via Zoom. And also, Onyekachi Adekoya is a security and defense consultant. Is the CEO, Aquilin Intelligence. Good evening to you, Mr. Adekoya. Let me start this conversation with you while we wait for Dr. Sule Yao Sule. Good evening to you. So it's day one of #nationwide protest. What's your impression about this first day? Did it go as you envisaged?
Thank you, and good evening to the viewers. Unfortunately, some lives have been lost today, so first, my heart goes out to the family of the police officer killed and those who lost life also in Borno this very day. In terms of our analysis and assessments and anticipation of what the day would have looked like, I think somewhat we were not disappointed. Some had anticipated that the protests would be widespread, uncontrolled, would break out into many pockets of riots and looting. But what we saw, interestingly, is an inverting of what occurred during the NSAS protest. It's still early days, I would say also, in that you had more devastation and destruction in the south as opposed in the north. Perhaps the political leaders in the north may have taken preparations for granted, is what this will be suggesting, because in Lagos, for example, and most part of the southwest and the south-south, largely the incidence of protest has gone on without any unfortunate fracas with law enforcement. Sadly, the issues of IED, which seem now to be gaining more footing since the publication by Boko Haram last year, August, that they'll begin to deploy more IEDs, perhaps has mixed up with the planned protest incident, maybe giving these would-be attackers the opportunity to have a go at the mass gathering of people, which led to loss of life also in Borno State. So there are a number of issues that are happening. The South-South has not been so eventful. The Southeast has been largely uneventful also. It's just the problems we're having are more likely within the Northwest and some flashes in the Northeast, particularly Borno State. So as anticipated, we had expected that, yes, they will come out, the protest will hold, but we're not expecting that it will be nationwide as advertised. So that was our analysis, yes.
Right. So, Mr. Adekoya, with the massive looting attacks and the unfortunate loss of lives we witnessed today, this is the first day. Is government justified with the warnings, the appeal, and what some called unnecessary apprehension ahead of this protest?
Yeah, so, we had made several commentaries. Even if you look at the Twitter space engagement between the IGP with SAN and Falana SAN, with some planned CSOs. If you listen carefully, the IG was saying he would not advise that people should go on a procession. And what the IG was simply saying is that we don't have enough security forces to dominate every part of the area. So providing security would be a bit of a challenge. Now, before I give you that answer, I'd also want to mention something we saw in Kano. In Kano, law enforcement perhaps were not ready for juveniles because what we saw was a lot of juveniles, kids under the age of, say, average 14 downwards, going on riots, not on a protest. And this looked like a bit of an attritional approach on the part of protesters. If you start with kids, what happens when the adult comes out? So government perhaps may have had their reasons. Again, looking at the protest culture that's taken over the world, there are protests in Southport in UK, in Kenya just recently, in Bangladesh, even in the US, all over the world, people are seemingly protesting. So there's a protest culture that tends to lead to riots. So government was perhaps right in sounding a note of caution. And if I think we looked at the political landscape, almost everybody has said, yes, the people have a right to protest, but protest should be done peacefully. The case of Kano is no longer a protest, but a case of, people wanting to loot and, engage in one form of vice or criminality or the other. So it's beginning to take on a worrisome dimension. Unexpectedly, we've seen curfews in Yobe, in some parts of Yobe, in Borno, in Kaduna, some parts of Kano also. So again, maybe self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mr. Adekoya, talking about Kano State, some stakeholders have said perhaps if Governor Abba Yusuf had warned impending hijackers against destabilizing the state, just like his colleagues did, it may have sent some shivers down their spine. But also, on a larger scale, how do you describe the level of destruction witnessed in Kano today, especially the Kano Information and Communication Technology Center, just days before it's scheduled to launch, setting it on fire and making off with valuable equipment?
Yeah, interestingly, I just returned from Kano, where I did a road trip from Kano to Katsina. And while in Kano, despite the fact that Kano is a state that has two emirs, as it were, the people didn't give off the impression that they were going to come out en masse for the protest. The polity was not that charged. Not even the Emirates tussle was even much of a concern. So Kano was indeed a surprise. Now, to your point, perhaps the government also took it for granted that Kano had been somewhat quiet. So it's a case of preparedness. What other states did was to engage thought leaders, religious leaders, to have the local governments engage people within the local government communities and areas to sensitize and conscientize the people on the need for peaceful protests and to avoid a repeat of, the fracas that followed the EndSARS. So I think, like I said earlier, whilst we are surprised, it smacks of a bit of unpreparedness on the part of Kano, in particular, and perhaps maybe Kaduna. Advancing words of threat are neither here nor there because the people have a fundamental right to protest, but doing so lawfully and peacefully is the campaign that government should have carried, a bit more aggressively to the people, holding thought leaders and different levels of power within the state accountable for their areas of responsibility and holding them also responsible for ensuring peace. So maybe that was somewhat lacking because we didn't see second level leadership in the communities. We just saw the people left to their own devices, knowing also that we don't have enough police for Nigeria on a good day, let alone on a day like this, when, you can quickly find the gaps in the government's posture, rather shockingly, as it happened today.
Right, but as a security consultant, talk to us about the impact of this curfew on the state, juxtaposing needs with the right of citizens to protest.
Well, the Constitution that provides the right to protest and assembly and association also gives conditions in which those rights can be abridged or abrogated, particularly in the cause of public good and public interest. So I think that all is provided for within the Constitution. Every well-meaning, right-thinking person would understand the reason for the curfew And perhaps, again, we've seen some of the people who led the protests or were calling for the protests, now calling for government to take tougher measures to ensure peace and security. It's no easy feat walking this delicate dance between the rights of the people as guaranteed in the Constitution and the rights and responsibility of government to the larger society on the other hand. So I think the curfew is just born out of necessity. And if you look at the way some of the governments have approached it, they've declared curfews in select local governments. I think Geshua in Yobe, for example, Potiskum, and one. So the curfew is somewhat localized and it's not statewide in some states. So it's commendable, and I think it's a bit of a, unfortunately, reactive approach on some parts of those governments.
All right. And I'm hoping that Dr. Yao Sule joins us very soon so he can give us his own perspective on what happened in Kano State today. Well, you know, with what we witnessed today, do you think the organizers of this protest have a duty to structure or restructure their protest?
I can't honestly think for the organizers of the protest. I'm not sure, you know, so you have a mob mentality. Once a team forms and they become a mob, they take on a mind of their own. I watched the interview between one of the TV stations and one of the lawyers of the group in Abuja, you know, having arguments on what to do, what not to do, move it to the stadium. No, I mean, it was clear at that point that the matter had gone beyond just one voice. So let's see how it goes. Some are anticipating that maybe more people will come out tomorrow. Some reckon that more people may not turn out, depending on how government continues to handle this and approach this. So I'm not sure what the protesters will be doing, but it's clear that protest is a guaranteed right. Rioting, looting, and stealing is criminality. The two are not the same, you know. So I think the message has to be very clear.
But Mr. Adekoya, in your years of engagement in this profession, is there a possible protest without hijack?
Not necessarily. So if you talk about my years of experience in this profession, you can also look at the side of statecraft and influence operations. Not every protest is what it looks like. When a protest becomes riotous and it begins to devolve into issues of burning down property, destroy, you know, you begin to ask who stands to benefit from the whole crisis situation. You know, whose interest does it serve? And some of us, you know, cynically also want to look at, are there external influences to some of these matters? We've seen the Orange Revolutions, we've seen the Arab Spring and what it eventually led to. So there's a configuration of interest when you have activities like this, some local, some foreign, you know, some political, some just genuine, just out of the frustration of the moment. And if they all come into a pot, they tend to convolute and create, you know, a crisis which sometimes cannot be localized. Protests can be hijacked. It's just a matter of interest at the moment and who is really at the tip of the spear in driving the process of the protest. I think that's where we like to look at in our own profession, not to say whether it can be hijacked. Any human activity can be hijacked. It just depends on who is pulling what strings.
All right. Before we continue this conversation, let me also announce that in the course of the program, we will be going to the nation's capital, Abuja, where the Inspector General of Police, Kaide Egbetokun, is set to speak on the state of security as the hardship protest begins today. All right, Mr. Adekoya, let's move on with this conversation. Now, I'm curious to know how you would, you know, assess the way security agencies handled the protesters today. Was it professional enough? Was it engaging? Were there loopholes you think the agencies should work on if this protest runs into day two?
No, I mean, I would commend the Nigerian police. It's been a bit of a mixed bag. So there are flashes of some good. There are shows of the fact that we learned lessons from the NSAS. I mean, I saw a police officer, a commissioner of police, I believe, who was chanting Aluta songs, offered biscuits, offered refreshments, reassured the protesting public that the police is there with them, to ensure their security. And that was quite soothing to see. We've seen a governor of a state come out, to assure the people that their voices will be heard, their message will be delivered, also offer them transport money, as it were, in a very convivial atmosphere. We've seen some charged police officers unnecessarily charged. I mean, the police is the institution of state that is that has a monopoly of force when it comes to internal security, as it were, amongst other agencies. So they must wear the authority light. The police are first civilians drawn from the public, giving citizens rights to police on behalf of the citizen. So I think we want to see more of those good adjustments. And again, the lessons have been more deepened in the South compared to the North. So maybe this will be another learning curve for the police across the country. Everything about security is local dynamics, local context, local atmospherics, local polity, and the police must learn to adapt to local dynamics such that they de-escalate the conflict. And some of that 6 billion allocated, which I know is not enough for an operation like this, which will likely last 10 to 15 days. Some of those should be allocated to refreshing the protesters and making the atmosphere a bit less charged. It's enough that people are agitated. You don't need stern-looking policemen making menacing moves and the rest. Now, for those rioters who are approaching government houses, seeking to unseat lawfully elected governors, those ones are not protesters, and those ones are anarchists. And, the law has a place for them, and I'm sure that the law will take its course.